we are very, very lucky to have David Drake here. In the past, I was also very lucky. I had Jim Drake with us at shows like this.
Yeah.
And he was the man.
Yeah.
Now you are the man.
Those are big shoes to fill. I'm really impressed by, can you guys hear me? Very impressed by the bios and the international distribution of people involved with the Starboard family. I can't think of another company globally that has more dedicated athletes from more places around the world. It was very impressive listening to you guys, and I know that my dad, Jim, would be very happy about that because we are a global sports community, and that's one of the great things that we are. Today I want to share with you a little of the connecting the dots about the Drake name that you see branded through the Starboard line and where that name comes from and the deep relationship that Starboard, specifically Spain, and my dad, Jim Drake, shared. It was amazing. So Jim Drake, he was born just before the Depression in 1929 in Hollywood, California. It actually is a place that exists. And he became an aeronautical engineer by training at Stanford. He was at the top of his class and liked airplanes so much when he was young before going to school, he actually borrowed, stole a ream of paper from his best friend's parents. They together, his best friend was Roy Disney, the nephew of Walt Disney. In Hollywood, these two boys, over a long weekend, folded airplanes out of that paper. And my dad was very impressed with folding the exact same airplane hundreds of times. They all flew differently. And so he became fascinated with why that was in airflow and design. So he went off to school, he studied hard, and right out of Stanford got a job at North American Aviation, which was one of the top aerospace aircraft designers and builders in the world at that time. And within 2 to 3 months of being hired there, they recognized that he had unbelievably uncommon talent with design and advanced him to their advanced design group faster than any other aeronautical engineer had ever made it in their company. One of the things that happened right after that was the accounting department came to the engineering department and said, we have extra room on our supercomputer. Payroll only takes a small part of it. Does the engineering department want to use our computer to help design their airplanes? And these were the guys that had designed the airplanes all through World War II. They were using long calculations with big, chalkboards full of math and slide rules and stuff. And they said, no, we're good. We saved the world with our designs. We don't need those fancy computer things. And my dad, fresh out of California, Stanford, said, I'll try. And got with a programmer and figured out how to do design on a computer for the first time in world history. CAD, as we know today. Well, just flash forward a couple months from that point, after he got that dial, they get a proposal, a competition that was put out to all the aircraft designers for a brand new concept, the first operational space plane in aviation history. It was the rocket plane that they took a V2 German-built rocket, engineered, put wings on it, and put a guy behind in the cockpit, and they wanted to go Mach 6. And they said, let's let Drake try, to do this thing. And he created the most radically different airframe structure ever engineered with the help of the computer and his outside-the-box thinking. It still today holds the speed record. So it wasn't that he worked on the project, he invented the project. He was the very first. And that's what I want you guys to get about this guy, is there's a lot of engineers. And he worked with Clinton here, and I'll get to that in a second. He worked with Chesta. He loved working with others, but he could see something that others didn't see somehow. We might call it a visionary or just uber talent or whatever, but he could create something from nothing. He created the future with the work that he did. The X-15, It dropped out of an aircraft that carried it up, and then my dad told me it went 30 seconds boosting straight up into the upper atmosphere into space, and then 30 seconds horizontally, and then came back to the ground. Here it is landing in California. So it was never ever done, and he was so proud of a couple of things. One was the stubby tail, because his first design iteration, they flew the first one and it was unstable. It was like the fin design was wrong. And so he cut off the top of the fin, widened the tail fin, and then it stabilized and they could fly it better. From there, he kept designing. He was at the top of his game. The guy that gave him the opportunity to design the original X-15, his boss at North American, was a guy that was also a very talented engineer and was recruited from the West Coast design group to go work at the Pentagon on the East Coast to help during the Cold War develop all the high altitude planes like the X-15 and the intercontinental ballistic missile defense system that we know today. And he was going back and forth from LA to Washington, D.C. from 1962 until, later. And one weekend when he was back in LA, he came over to my dad's house and they drank a bottle of Remy Martin cognac and stayed up all night with a game that they played together. Let's build a sailboat that is portable that I can use on the Potomac River next to the Pentagon. And they invented a kite-powered water ski. And then by dawn, the calculations showed that the kite didn't have enough lift. And therefore, you had to have more flotation. And he said probably a surfboard would be a better choice. So they invented kite surfing, kiteboarding that very first night. But driving in and out of LA to Mojave, where the X-15 was being tested, he had a lot of time to think. And he thought, what if I bring the kite down to the board and connect it with a swivel and give it a leading edge that's stiff, like your inflatable bladders today and all that. The mast was stiff, and then a wishbone boom. And it just clicked on these hour-and-a-half drives out to Edwards and back. And so windsurfing started to take form in his mind. Then he went to a party at his neighbor's house, and the neighbor, listening to this idea, said, this is a brilliant idea. He was a surfer and kind of got it and said, why don't we build a prototype and test it? My dad said, that sounds great, but I'm really busy. And so he kind of blew it off. And the next year, same party, it was like a holiday party. The guy said, hey, you're that guy with that idea. Did you ever build one? And my dad said, no, and he said, we're going to build one together if that's okay with you. My dad said, sure. He thought the guy wasn't serious, but a week later, he called him up and said, I found a foam blank and I need you to go down to the surf shop and tell the shaper how to shape it. So he did. It became the original windsurfer. It was made from a tandem surfboard blank, the biggest blank you could find. He built the original rigging and the universal, the dagger board, everything you see from scratch in our garage. But what's missing here? Does anybody with a sharp eye see what a longboard might not have in this picture? An uphaul. So the first day he forgot that there was an uphaul because he envisioned as the inventor standing on the board, not having to pull it out of the water. So anyway, this is the first day about 5 miles south of our home in Santa Monica at Marina Del Rey. And that's the very first day. I mean, he's clue first, but at least he's upright, And, he really was satisfied with how it worked and went back to Washington. He was then recruited over to the Pentagon later. And when he left, his partner, Hoyle Schweitzer, started building from my dad's designs a patent application, and they got the patent and started the industry out of our garage. Windsurfing International was founded out of our garage in Mesa Road. And then the Schweitzer family started building the boards in their garage when my dad couldn't keep up. Let's slow down just a bit. And so the windsurfer took off, as we all know, big time in Europe compared to the US. Made an Olympic sport in 1984, which Svein Rasmussen got 11th. His board was a little slow that day, but he had gotten second in the trials up to that point. So he was a favored medal contender. And just as we all know, sometimes your rig just doesn't quite do what you want it to. But that was the '84 Olympics in its home town of Los Angeles. We're hoping now to get winging into the Olympics, maybe in LA when it returns, for that full circle kind of let's do that kind of thing. So windsurfing. Windsurfing is the headwaters of everything that is downstream. So all of these sports that we know today, I would even propose that stand-up paddling came from windsurfing, because you look at the group in Maui like Laird Hamilton who developed the stand-up paddle. It really was a windsurfing crowd. But kiting, winging, these are all, if you've seen Broken Molds, the Schweitzer's movie about how these sports really were offshoots of original windsurfing. As Svein told you just moments ago, the modern windsurfer is the wing foil. So you can think of all these wind sports as almost like windsurfing as a general term, even though the original windsurfing is kind of dropped a little in popularity. Others have taken up. It's the same group that are doing them. It's just a modern evolution of the same basic wind theory. Now we can go to the wing. And then in 1981, our dear friend Uli Stanzu, who founded Surf Magazine, a German journalist, they always did board tests for that magazine, something that was really in demand at that time is the tests. Everyone wanted to know what's the best. And so he was in the Canaries testing, and flying fish were flying all around him as he tested boards. And he thought, wow, that's great. The flying fish can soar just a moment before they actually go back into the water. And he thought, why aren't windsurfer rigs symmetrical? They have more area above the boom. So when you go up in the air, which he had seen in Hawaii, these guys jumping, they kind of plop back down. And he thought to himself, that would be fun to do something like a flying fish. And so when him and my dad got together, he said, Jim, can we build a symmetrical rig that would have a little better flight? And my dad said, I've got it, and drew literally on a napkin at an Italian restaurant, the wing. And from that moment on, winging was invented. They patented it in 1981, built a rig in Germany. Peter Cabrina, as you go back one, tested it. This is Uli testing the prototype in Thailand. He had no wind that day, as I'm sure, southern Thailand probably isn't windy all the time, not like here at the gorge. And it didn't have the foil. And it had a bit of a clunky, aluminum tubing. The tech wasn't advanced at that time. And so they let their patent expire, and it didn't really catch on. It didn't, germinate. However, the patent was there to show that, that was the next thing, because think about it was the guy that had invented windsurfing. It wasn't somebody who took these things lightly. And 81 comes and goes. And then later on, let's say flash forward to 1999. My dad is at a boat show and wanders into the Starboard booth where he meets Svein Rasmussen. And they hit it off. And as Svein told me in a talk we had yesterday, here was this handsome gentleman. He was so smart and so down to earth. And I mean, the talk that I'm giving out, he would have had you guys laughing and thinking, and here he is with Svein. So anyway, back to the boat show, he sees the Go board and he said, that looks like a very smart idea. And the Go, if you don't know, was the original short wide board in the world. They were all long and skinny before that point. And so Svein came to America with that Go, showed it to my dad. My dad said, why don't we plan to meet? I'd like to try it. He was older at this point, in his 60s, and he had broken his collarbone wave sailing in LA in the beach break. And so he said, that board looks stable enough for me to get back on the water after about a 6-month keel. And I said to Svein yesterday, yeah, it was good for him and it was good for the world, because everybody needed a reinvention of the sport at that point. It was really high wind, really high high speed, and it lost everybody with all that. So the Go board reintroduced the idea of one board doing everything that a family could take to the beach. Teach the kids with the little side wings on it that kind of were like dagger boards. Then mom could take it out, and then when the wind got good, dad could, put on his bigger sail and blast around on it. The Go board was a game changer. Well, Svein said to my dad, "This is a great idea. What more can we do with it, and how will we do that?" And my dad said, "Well, if you want to make a difference in the world with this board, you have to win world championships." That's what it is. And Fiona, world champion. I mean, it's just world championships matter. And that was 1999. By 2000, the Formula race class and the Formula board that Svein and my dad and Chesta and others worked on to develop 1 year later won the first 6 places in the world championship. So they were onto something with that design. The wide board was a hit. And so they expanded on that and created a line. Svein was telling me a great story yesterday about kiting at Kite Beach in Maui. Jimmy Lewis, who's a really great shaper, had the traditional design. He had a narrow kind of longer board. And Svein and my dad went over to him and said, "Hey, Jimmy," Keith Baxter was there. And he said, "Would you mind if we did some modifications?" And Jimmy looked at him and said, "Okay." And they went to the car and got a saw. And they chopped the board to make it the first short, wide kite board ever built. And that design concept of short, wide has never gone away. It's all that you see now throughout everybody's lineup, short, wide. But they weren't satisfied there. They had to go long and skinny too. So they came up with a board called the K15. It was a paddleboard, but it could sail too, but it was mostly a paddleboard. In 2009 in Hamburg, in Germany, at the very first SUP World Championships, it blew everything away. It won first place a lot of places, like the Formula board had done. So the designs that they hit on were huge, and it changed the sport. So we're reinventing these things. That's a design that they came up with to try to get an Olympic class built. Now it's the IQ. The 95 centimeter wide tail remains in the IQ class. That was a Jim Drake, Svein Rasmussen, Chesta design. Then my dad died in 2012 after living in Thailand, working with Starboard, just a dear partner to Svein and the company. And flash forward. Now we have winging on Starboard equipment, poised to become like IQ, a new Olympic class, the X15 class. All in time. It had to wait for the tech, but the brain power knew about it 20 years before at Starboard. That's the company you're involved with. It's a leader. It's an innovator that builds quality stuff that nobody can touch. And the friendliness of the company, and I see it here, the relationship between Svein and Jim Drake, just that's what I think of when I think of Starboard. The tech is one thing. It's the family. It's the focus on getting women and children and international community involved. The eco focus. All of this stuff makes Starboard a leader. I'm so proud of the way that my dad worked with Svein, and I'm so proud to see the company succeeding today. And I'm just proud to be here to connect the Drake name a little for you guys as you see it on your equipment that I hope you sell a lot of. Good luck. Thanks.
Thank you, David Drake. Amazing, amazing, amazing.